So now we get on to what to do. So basically, I appreciate to this point we've thrown a lot of obligations at you, and this section now is really about what you can do about it. So really, I go back to the first slide where I say the data marketer and the lawyer walk into a bar in Austin. That was a true scenario, and what we discussed was how hard it is for companies to turn data regulation into data compliance. And we said it just should be easier, but the problem is most small companies don't know how to do that. Data protection used to be the domain of big businesses, so the guys doing 27001 ISO compliance and all of that type of thing. So it was the banks, it was the big enterprises that were doing it, and so we said there must be an easier way to do it. So what we did on the back of returning from the States was we made a way of making it easy and created a free framework for anyone to access and complete at their own will. So what I'll do is I'll take you through what to do about GDPR compliance as a non-EU business, but frame it around the framework that we've created. So the first thing is to understand your risk. So the way I would do that is I would look at your web analytics, have a look at where your customers are coming from. I'd look at your CRM data, how many of your customers are in the EU. Is it 1%, 2%, 3%? What's your actual your risk going into this? And then using something like our system, you can just copy it into an Excel spreadsheet, or if you want, or you can use this system. I'll share the link with Kirsty, so she can push it out to everyone. So the first thing I suggest is appointing your team. So as Tim said earlier, DPO is not always necessary. An EU representative is more likely to be required. But having data protection champions within your business, I believe, is essential. So training people to be aware of data protection and to make sure that they're looking out for things in your business. So those people should be acting as they should be advocating for good protection over your customers' data and your staff's data. So just on that slide, the software provides a way of recording the name, email, and telephone number of those people, so you've always got it to hand. The next is compliance gap analysis. So we've created this using the ICO, the UK ICO standards, and we've done it for controllers and processors. But basically, we look against a number of criteria. So we're looking at transparency and lawfulness, individual rights, accountability and governance, security and international transfers and breaches. We basically set out what the requirement is and phrase it as a question. Does your company do X, Y, and Z? And then we provide a bit more detail if you need it. And you simply put a status next to it. So not started, work in progress, compliant, for instance. And going through this will allow you to understand where your risks are, understand where you're strong, understand where you need to do more work, and you can actually create an action plan out of it and share with stakeholders in the business kind of where your current compliance level is. The next thing is knowing your data. So any business should know their data inside out now. So there's a data map within this, and that data map is a process that we would typically run through with customers. So we'd look at every department in the business, and you'd sit down with the head of department or people in that department and say, okay, what data are you accessing to do your job? So the obvious one, employee data is the example, and financial information. Okay, what information do you actually need to run payroll? Well, I need their bank details, I need their social security number or their NI number, I need their address, and I need tax number, I need tax code, and you start logging all of that information. And then you work through things like the group of people it relates to, whether you've got a lawful basis for having that data. So I've got consent on this example, but actually that's a contractual obligation with that employee to pay them. You need that data. And then you also need to look at where the data is being stored and who has access to it. So in our business, for example, our payroll data, the Australian Tax Office, our accountants, our financial auditing company all have access to that information. So we list those individuals that have access to it. And then we also list where the data is stored. In our instance, Xero.com, which is a US-based warehouse. And so there is an international transfer, and we've actually checked that they're GDPR compliant and we're all good. So we map every single process in the organization like that. And what you find is that people have access to data that they don't really need. So you simply retract access to those people, and only people who need the access to the data to do a job have access to it by the time you've finished. So document processes, this is really simple. So by mapping your data, you're going to understand the various processes and sub-processes you're using. So a list of who those are and whether they're compliant or not, and whether you've got processing agreements with them or not is adequate here. Then process for data events. So as Tim mentioned, subject access requests, people could be asking for deletion, access to their data. They could be asking for an amendment. What this software does is it provides a form, an embedded form, which goes on your website in the privacy notice that the data subject can submit their request to you, and it guides them through the process. And then that pushes that request into this system, and you get a data protection query number, and it gives you a process for handling that. So as Tim said, we've got 1 month to deal with that, and this process takes you through every step of the journey and marks it off as complete when you're done. Then assets and processes. So by becoming compliant, you're going to be building up assets. So you can have things like privacy policies, or privacy notices and amendments of those. You're going to be having complaint or data subject inquiry acknowledgement emails. All of these items should be gathered into one asset manager, so everyone in the organization knows where to go to access those assets, policies, processes. And then finally, training your team. So training is not a tick box exercise from our perspective. So as we mentioned, there's going to be more and more data collected on people over the coming years, and data protection. I certainly want the companies I'm dealing with to be aware of protecting my data. So data protection should be a cultural aspect to your business. It should be just something that happens naturally. So I would say train all of your staff, train all of your leaders, and make sure that you log that training and log the refresher courses. And again, what this will enable you to do is when the GDPR, when an authority comes knocking at your door, if you ever do have a breach, and you'll be able to demonstrate, right, okay, these are all of the actions that we are taking to protect the data of our customers. And just as a side note, I mean, I've spent 15 years now working in data, and I used to own a data warehousing company in the UK that handled government data and bank data and so on. And I've had 2 breaches in the past, and I have to say it's hard work. Okay, so when someone's on you, and it's an authority, the levels of information that you have to provide them and the timelines, we're talking, it gets tough quite quick. So I would say having all of this information to hand will put you in good stead to protect your business.